Today's voiceover talent is more than just a pretty voice. Today's voiceover talent has to be a boss. A VO boss. Set yourself up with business owners' strategies and success with your host, Ganguzza, along with some of the strongest voices in our industry. Rock your business like a boss. A VO boss.
Hey everybody, welcome to the VO Boss podcast. I'm Ganguzza, your host, along with my lovely co-host, Gabby.
Hey everybody.
And today's episode, we're going to talk about business infrastructure, which I think is super important as we begin our businesses or we're running our businesses so that we can actually have a foundation and a base. So, Gabby, tell me a little bit about your business foundation, your base. What is it that works in your infrastructure?
So right now I'm an LLC, and I have been for a number of years. Now, like a lot of people in voiceover, I started as a sole proprietor, but I ran into a lot of limitations with that pretty quickly. And so for my model, it made the most sense to switch over to an LLC, get my corporate paperwork, get my EIN, which is an employee identification number. And, it works pretty well, and I'm pretty pleased with it. Now, what about yours, Ann?
Well, I actually, believe it or not, have been, I am a sole proprietor DBA for just about, I want to say 7 years already. And and what I think is really interesting is I know this is a huge question for a lot of talent. Do I incorporate? Do I become an LLC? I don't understand. It's usually, I think, what scares people away. And I think that one thing that you and I had discussed prior to this was that it really depends on your state. And the limitations of each for the state. So, for example, for me to become an LLC, it was a considerable amount of money. And my accountant, when I spoke to my accountant about it, recommended that I, didn't really need to have an LLC because of the investment. And so I could actually get away in the state of California with a DBA, doing business as, and that would give me all of the coverage that I needed. And the most important thing that it allowed me to do, and I think that you and I would both agree, is that it allows you to keep your business finances separate from your personal finances, which is pretty darn important when you're talking about end of the year taxes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, most definitely. There's a lot of factors to take into consideration with this. Your state absolutely is probably the biggest factor. Mm-hmm. Every single state has different categories and different fees related to incorporating versus LLC, because those are actually two different things. Even though an LLC is a corporation, it's a limited liability corporation.
Versus an S-corp.
Right, which most voice actors qualify for because we do have a limited liability position. We don't have customers coming and going. We don't have a storefront. We don't have inventory. Right. So we can typically do that. But yeah, they do vary pretty greatly. In some states, it's very high. It can cost thousands of dollars to incorporate or to have an LLC. In some states, It's just a few $100s. And then you also have to look at the annual costs involved because the annuals make a really, really big difference. Mm-hmm. Some states don't have an annual fee. So one of the best things to do is first, if you're kind of researching this process, go to your Secretary of State's website. And on your Secretary of State's website, you should be able to access the fee structure for these processes. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, you can actually file your applications yourself.
That's what I did.
Yeah. And nothing pisses me off more than some of these companies that are out there that try to take advantage of that. And they have these corporate kits. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep. And I get them in the mail all the time.
Yeah. And they cost so much money for something that you can totally do yourself. It is so not a big deal. It's literally go to a website, fill out a form, and you're done.
Right.
Send in a check.
Absolutely. And all I did was go to my state government website. And was able to do it all online, actually. And actually, I know you were talking about annual renewal fees. Well, for example, the state of California for a DBA, I believe mine renews every 5 years. And so it only cost me a few $100s. Whereas if I were to incorporate, it was going to cost me, or LLC, it was going to cost me $3,000 or something of that nature, and then a renewal fee every year. And so for me, the DBA works. Now, what I guess, Gabby, let's talk a little bit about what are the main reasons to incorporate your business or form an LLC or DBA,
or not to do it. Yeah. So let's start with sole proprietorship. Let's start there because it's where most people are. If you are in voiceover currently and you don't have a corporate license, but you are in fact doing business, you're sending your clients invoices, you're making some money, you are a sole proprietor, whether you know it or not.
Right.
That's the category that you fall under. So with sole proprietorship, there's a couple things that happen. The first is you get taxed at a much higher rate, which is why it's not all that appealing long term. However, sole proprietorship does allow for things like business use of home, and it allows for certain deductibles and in your tax categories that can be very beneficial. But what I've always found is this. If you're still part-time in voiceover and you have a day job with a W-2, then you're actually better off staying a sole proprietor for as long as possible.
I agree with you there. I agree with you there. I believe that when I was doing part-time VO, it wasn't until I had no separation of business and personal accounts. And so I had more money invested in my voiceover career than I was making. And so for that reason, it was okay for me to just, at the end of the year, 1099. So that worked for me until I started going full-time and then making money. And then when I did that, I spoke with my accountant to find out what the recommendation was for the state of California and, how that would be best for my situation.
Right. Because the thing about being a sole proprietor, too, and again, especially if you have another form of income, is that as long as you have what the IRS would consider to be a failing business, meaning that you're spending more to run it than you're making, then you can get tax breaks that would go towards the money that you earn W-2, and you can actually get a decent amount of money back on your taxes.
Right, exactly. And I think that they expect you to have, like if it's a starting business, I know that my accountant was saying something about, I think you can, for 5 years, you can claim a loss.
Yes,
if you're
5 years.
investing, yeah, 5 years you can claim a loss while you're investing in training, in equipment, in travel costs, whatever it is. And then after that, and I think that she recommended that you don't. Well, I work from home, but it was one of those things where it raises red flags if you claim certain things, and the home was going to be one of those things. If I were going to start, itemizing things from my home, but I can absolutely categorize expenses in training and equipment and that sort of thing.
So I want to address that real quick because I've heard this a lot from various tax professionals and accountants, and the whole thing of business use of home. This is a really kind of sticky one. So
it is. It's complex.
I'm fortunate enough. I have a very close friend who works at the IRS. He's he's an auditor. And so he actually did a class for my meetup group a while back, and he gave us some really, really great tips. And one of those tips and one of the things that he drilled into our brains when it comes to expensable items is the phrase ordinary and necessary. The things that you expense have to be ordinary and necessary for running your business. And with business use of home, he said, look, he goes, accountants are afraid of it because, yes, it can very easily be a red flag area. Yes. And he goes, the problem is a lot of people use and abuse the business use of home category. He goes, so first of all, it has to be a dedicated space. He goes, it has to be a space in your home that is used exclusively for business purposes. He goes, if it's not, if it's like a spare bedroom that's doubling as your office,
right,
it doesn't count. And he goes, that's where it's problematic for people. Now,
interesting.
most voice actors, myself included, have a very dedicated space. So my home, much to my husband's dismay, doesn't have a garage.
Right.
The garage is my office, or what would be the garage. Yeah.
I have a dedicated space in my spare bed. It is a spare bedroom, but it's my office.
Yeah, but
So
I've seen your house. Yeah, you have a dedicated space. Absolutely.
It's dedicated. Absolutely. It's the only thing that happens.
All
in
it's
that
used
space.
for. Right. So my garage is, instead of being a 450 square foot 2-car garage, is a 450 square foot office space with my booth in it. We have desks, we have all of our gear and our equipment, and I have employees. And yeah, so that space I can absolutely claim on my taxes.
Right.
You can
That
claim
makes
your
sense.
space. Absolutely.
Yep.
But like I said,
That makes
accountants
sense.
get worried because they know people try to cheat this a little bit.
Sure.
So if you're doing it right and your space is dedicated, then by all means, take that percentage of business use of home. But remember, it's a percentage. It's not the whole.
I want to, that excellent advice. And one thing I do want to say is, it's so important that, if you're serious about voiceover and you're serious about this as a business, that you really do take a look at the best way to create your infrastructure, because at the end of the year, it's going to make such a huge difference. And I can't even tell you, when I was working part-time versus working full-time and having my account separate, it was so hard to keep track of expenses because, they were coming out of my personal bank account. And then, it was just so hard at the end of the year for tax time to really categorize or itemize any of that. And once I was able to, split that off into, a DBA and get a separate business account, it was so much easier to just keep track of things. And I will tell you that, after I'm close to 10 years full time, with my business, and I did for 5 years claim a loss because I was investing a lot of money in my business and not making as much in the beginning. And I will say that keeping your records, organized and straight, and I will tell you, like, hands down, hiring an accountant was the best thing I ever did for my business because, it's just one of those jobs that, I think we talked about this in a previous podcast is, if you don't love it, outsource it. I'm going to outsource it to the person who can really, do a great job for me. And I just happen to be very fortunate to have a great accountant. I did get audited last year, and it was a by mail audit, and everything worked out perfectly. All they wanted was some additional records for my travel, and I was able to provide that to them after about 100 pages of everything else that they required, and everything worked out. So it's not horrible, and I'm going to say that the reason why it worked out was because I was so organized and because I had a good accountant, and I was able to justify everything that I had reported on my taxes, which was really great, and I wasn't really nervous about it. So it's one of those things that I think is so important that you really, as a business, figure out which way you're going, what direction you're going, but no matter what you do, make sure that you have those accounts separate so that it's easy for you to categorize and itemize things at the end of the year.
Well, I think that what happens more often than not is most of us, when we start our voiceover career, are so blissfully unprepared
Yeah, right?
to begin expense tracking and doing basic accounting. It is mind-boggling. It's new.
Yeah,
it takes
absolutely.
a new kind of discipline and dedication. And the honest to God truth is I don't know any voice actor that began with everything in absolute perfect working order.
Absolutely.
Instead, year one and possibly year two are like a scrambly cluster where you're running around with all these receipts and trying to make sense of
Absolutely.
things, and it's
And
a mess.
at the end of the year, you're banging your head against the
Yeah.
going crazy, going, oh my gosh, what do I do now? I just
And-
remember panicking.
Yeah,
when I didn't have it together, I was like, oh God, it's the end of the year. Now what do I do? It's like I've got to look up records here, find my receipts there. It's terrifying a little bit when you're not, when you're not an accountant and you're not familiar, and it's not something that you love to do. It's one of those things we just kind of like, let's do the job, get paid for it, and then go on to the next thing.
Yep. And it happens to everybody. And I think that part of that panic and that fear that sinks in is because early on we have a really bad relationship with the IRS and we have a really bad view of them.
That's so true. That's so true. And that's why I shared my story, because I didn't want everybody to think that, it's all evil and it's all horrible.
No,
I mean they simply asked me for additional records and I gave it to them, and it really helped that I was prepared. It helped that, I had, every day, I actually have, and trust me, it took me a long time to have an accountant. I mean, I was, I was doing this on my own for many years, until all of a sudden said, you know what, why don't I found a great person who did our taxes at the end of the year. And I said, would you be willing, to, on a monthly basis, do my books? And thankfully she said yes. And it was the best move I ever made, just because she was able to along the way guide me. And we could keep up with it, which is so important, rather than waiting till the end of the year when all of a sudden you're like, oh no, I've got to, okay, so who were my clients? How much did I make? And where's that receipt? And how much did I spend? And if you keep it up on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis, it makes it so much easier at the end of the year.
Yeah. And again, it's discipline. There are so many digital ways now to expense track. Having a dedicated bank account is huge, because you can literally just print your statements and not have to worry so much about paper receipts. You can use scanners. If you prefer paper receipts, that's fine. You just have to be very dedicated with their entry and the record keeping. I tell people it's a once a month thing in terms of maintenance. In my own business, now here's what's interesting. So again, 15 years into this, even with an LLC, I do my own taxes. I don't have an accountant yet. I'm actually probably hiring one for the first time this year. And it's actually because my corporation is possibly having to move into a different tax bracket. And as a result of that, it's become over my head. But aside from that, I've done it myself. Every first of the month, I enter and reconcile receipts and reconcile expenses versus income. And I use a combination of FreshBooks, which is my accounting software, and I use TaxAct to do my filing. And so I do monthly and then quarterly reconciliation, and I also pay my estimated taxes quarterly as well.
Absolutely. That's a big help.
It is something that you can manage yourself if, again, you have the discipline for it. If it gives you too much of a headache and it's too freaky, then yes, by all means, bring an accountant in.
I did mine myself as well for many years. It's just the past 3 years when I was getting myself into another tax bracket, which is a good thing. It's a good thing. And at that point it was over my head, and I thought maybe I'm not taking advantage of everything that I possibly can. And so it's absolutely worth my money to have someone to really, do my books for me. So that's fantastic. So I think that, our listeners might want to know, again, a little bit the advantages of incorporating or having a DBA. And I know that you said the one thing that we talked about is keeping your finances separate, but the other thing might be, so that people can't sue you. Let's talk about that a little bit.
So an LLC or a corporate license protects your personal interests from your business interests. Now, voiceover doesn't come with a ton of risk. It's not, again, like we have storefronts and inventories and those things. But if someone were to take legal action against you, it separates your business and its assets and liabilities from your personal assets and liabilities, which is where you're able to protect things like your home and your car and your savings account and, the things that really matter.
Absolutely. And, it was something that I never thought. Some people, there's a couple of different schools of thought. Do you need to have do you need to be protected because we don't typically run into those instances? For me, it's a possibility because I have students come over to the home, or I have students come over for workouts. And so if somebody were to hurt themselves, in my home, that could be a reality for me. And it's something that I need to consider for my business.
Same here, for coaching, for classes, for any additional service that you might be providing. Even once in a blue moon, even though it's very rare, I may have a client come here to record.
Right. Absolutely.
So, yeah, you have to be protected in those situations. Now, also what we see in a lot of instances is that it is faster, easier, and more efficient in terms of getting paid when you are an LLC and you're doing corp-to-corp transactions. Now, sole proprietors, of course, yes, companies would issue you a 1099, which they do with an LLC anyway. But the paperwork that I have to fill out, so when a business is looking to add me to their vendor list, I have to fill out what's known as a W-9. But the difference is a sole proprietor is putting their social security number on that W-9. I'm putting my business's EIN.
Actually, I'm just going to say in the state of California, as a DBA, I actually get an EIN number.
See, again, that's where it differs state to state sometimes.
So, so super important that you guys find out, how that, what are the differences in the state. So that's one of the reasons is, I was issued an EIN number, which I was surprised. And that's why I am still a DBA after so many years being full-time, because I have an EIN number and it pretty much everything is covered for me. And it's only a 5-year renewal fee. And so, it's cost effective for me. I do have the concern, though, that if people come over and hurt themselves, in my space, in my studio space, that I have it's possible I could get sued.
And, well, even if you, DBA or otherwise, not having an EIN can definitely delay payment processes. Oh, agreed. And it can make vendor relations kind of difficult because a corporation would rather work with another corporation.
Exactly. That's an excellent point.
So,
wow, Gabby, that was quite an intense podcast. I would say.
I know, and it's so. I hope that people take away a couple things from it. Obviously, one, that it doesn't have to be scary. The IRS is not like this big bad monster that's out to get you. They're actually really easy to work with. I've had to talk to them and call them and do things with them many, many times, and they're really not as hideous as everyone wants to think.
Exactly. I agree.
And that as you go through this voiceover journey and as you have different income brackets and different places, milestones in your career, you're going to have to do some research on these things and do your homework, Secretary of State offices, state laws and regulations, and then, of course, eventually consulting with an accountant and possibly moving over to an accounting system that's off-site for you.
So our takeaways, again, do your homework. Check out what the laws are in your state. Consider, and I think we are going to have an entire podcast dedicated to accounting software. So we will be talking about that in the future, probably very close to this podcast. So do your homework, find out what's required. Absolutely, step back and start to take a serious look at, your categories and your investments into this as a business, as well as your, what you're getting, income that's coming in, as well as expenses going out. I think that's super important to really start trying to organize that. And like Gabby, you were saying, like on a monthly basis, or for me, it's like a week, kind of a weekly to a monthly basis where I'm having an accountant. Consider an accountant if you absolutely are at a loss. And I learn a lot from my accountant, by the way. It's not just like, oh, here, you take care of it, and I don't look at the books. I absolutely look at the books because I need her to help me find out where is my money going. Am I spending too much money on equipment? Am I spending too much money on, whatever it could be, on pay-to-play memberships, whatever it is, on online softwares, to help me do my job, whatever it is, where am I making the most money? She can help me do that. And she's very willing to help me in the software. Find that out for myself too, because I can't, I still do my own invoicing. She doesn't do my invoicing for me. So I still need to go in and be familiar with the software. So there's a lot of things that I'm learning. So make sure you guys do your homework. Don't be afraid of the IRS. They're not big, horrible. Well, for the most part, I've not had horrible experiences with them. And make sure that you're aware of your state laws.
Yep.
All right, Gabby, it's been an amazing podcast. Thanks so much for your wisdom and your experience, and I think it's going to be very beneficial for our listeners.
Yours as well.
Yes, thank you. And I'm super excited for our next podcast where we talk about accounting software. Okay, big thanks to our sponsor, IPDTL. If you guys were impressed with our quality connection and recording, which I am always impressed, you too can record like a boss. You can find out more at ipdtl.com. From all of us at the VO Boss Podcast, have a kick butt week.
And don't forget to rock your business like a boss.
A VO boss.
Like us on Facebook at VO Boss Podcast and Twitter at VO_boss.
And you can subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher. Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next week.
Rock your business like a boss. A VO boss. All rights reserved. And Ganguzza voice talent in association with 3 Moon Media. Redistribution with permission. Coast-to-coast connectivity via IPDTL.